Hi everyone, my name is Patrick Akil, and for today we talk about product lines and product families. It's really cool because it's kind of the ultimate way of reusing software, and our guest shared the ins and outs of how they're doing it over at JetBrains, because she's currently developer advocate over there as well. Rachel Appel. Don't forget to leave a review on your favorite podcast platform, or let us know in the comment section below on YouTube. Enjoy!
Welcome to Beyond Coding, a dive into the world of successful people in IT. From your sponsors, Zebia, creating digital leaders. Here's your host, Patrick Akil.
Hi Rachel, how's it going?
Hello, how are you?
I'm great. How about you?
Hanging in there, pandemic times, but, doing the best we all can, I guess.
Yeah, I think like everyone, I can see your home as well. Everyone's working from home nowadays. Yeah. But I invited you on the show to talk about product lines or product families even.
Yes.
Because you're currently working with JetBrains.
Correct.
Yeah, and I use Intellij as my editor. I've used Rider and I've used Goland and the whole thing. And I don't know how it got to that point, right? I think if you're building a product, you can build it with a specific goal in mind. And then it can evolve, right? It can become a subset of that product. And then I think that's how you kind of get your product family up and running. How has it kind of evolved or how have you seen it evolve throughout the years?
Yeah, so our product family in particular started many years ago before it was a family or thought to be a family, which is how a lot of organic families pop up. And at first it was called Intellij Renamer, and it was just a little refactoring tool for Java.
Yeah.
And then they made it Intellij, the IDE at some point.
Yeah.
And it stayed that way for a bit. And then as sales started picking up and whatnot, the founders said, well, we would like to build another IDE, and Ruby's becoming very popular. So RubyMine would be this first IDE.
Yeah.
But we already have an IDE. What do we do? Oh, well, we could build a whole nother IDE from the ground up.
Yeah.
Or we have an IDE. We could just make it so that this IDE works with Ruby as well. Yeah. So there are certain shared IDE parts, but then certain Ruby editing parts.
Exactly.
So that's kind of the thought behind how it came about. And this is how a lot of products end up happening. Yeah. Some are specifically engineered as a product line. And for those, they're usually firmware related, like your Nokia phones or a lot of the electronics and embedded systems. Yeah. They're the ones that they tend to plan this out from the go because they know that down the years, they're going to have these different models of phones and they need to do this. But in other types of applications, particularly software only, a lot of folks don't consider this. Yeah. And so they build a product and then say, well, we want to build another product that is essentially the same product, but it has a different market demand. Yeah. Right. So a different market segment demand, I should say. And then what do you do? So building it from the ground up, obviously, all right, if it's two products and that's the end of it, you might be able to get away with this. Yeah. But once you add on a third, a fourth, and you keep going, can you imagine the efforts? What are you going to do? Duplicate entire teams for this? It's just right away. That's too much money to be paying. Yeah. It doesn't scale well. And all right, so you end up with bugs, right? So you'll end up with maybe a bug in the third product that just didn't show up in the other products yet. Yeah. And then it will, but you've already fixed it in this one product. Then you have to go back and kind of refix it in the other ones. And it just turns into a big mess.
Sounds
really
like it.
Quickly. Yeah. The minute you just start spawning these products, then it's it's a big mess trying to manage all of this. Yeah. Especially if you do have shared components among them. Yeah. So, and that's kind of the key here, the shared components. So all developers, they sit down, they start writing code, and they look at the module level, the class level, the function level, and they say, I need to reuse this code.
Okay.
Which is the first wrong thing to do.
Yeah.
And this doesn't matter what kind of software you're building. And people are going to look at this and think, blaspheme, what is she saying? Of course you want to reuse code.
Yeah.
But do you? When you look at actual statistics, and being that we make IDEs, we keep statistics on these kind of things,
Nice.
right? Everyone who makes them does. How much code do they look at it and say, will we reuse this? As opposed to automatically saying, yes, we're going to build it for reuse, which is what happens.
Yeah.
But like somewhere of like 80% actually doesn't get reused.
Exactly.
Okay, that doesn't make it bad necessarily, but it didn't have the effect you intended.
Yeah.
Okay? But this is taking reuse from that level that we normally think of, first of all, and often think of in a faulty manner because it doesn't get reused. And we take that, and instead of like making it a little bit bigger, we just leave it at that module or class level.
Yeah.
We'll say, well, I'm going to reuse this component. Yeah, that's great. That's, yeah, sure, what you're supposed to do if you're sharing that component across multiple projects.
Yeah.
But this is the ultimate form of reuse. You're reusing an entire product.
Exactly.
So that's what we're doing. So you can't get any higher on the pinnacle of reuse. And developers, reusable code. How about your whole product? What? Well, don't talk to me about reuse if you're not going to talk to me at that scale, right? Because that is something you need to consider.
Interesting.
So people always architect with reuse at this granular level, and they're missing a big picture.
Yeah.
Now, there's plenty of software that is perfectly fine as a single system. Notepad. Perfect. Right? So what, I mean, like now Notepad with dark theme, that's actually just a feature though, but that's about as far as you go with that.
Yeah.
Right? But if you take a look at an IDE or several types of software that are out there, such as e-commerce sites, somebody builds a website for general e-commerce. Well, that could fit a variety of market niches, right? Yeah. It could be selling books, selling clothing, selling turtles, like whatever, you know.
Exactly.
And for all of those different markets, it's in general going to have the same stuff, like a cart, adding things to the cart, checking out and paying, browsing the catalog, filtering, sorting. All of that's going to be the same.
Yeah.
But then you're going to have that little twisty thing, like when you buy a book versus an article of clothing. You don't need to know the size of the book to try it on.
Exactly.
You don't care about those certain things, or if you're buying, say, a turtle, like you need to know that it's going to actually be a turtle and not a tortoise, as opposed to a book or a dress or a hat, right? So it's different mechanics at that point. So why not reuse that whole product, but have those enhancements for those market niches? And that's what our product family does. Yeah. So it's always driven by a business reason.
Nice.
Where in regular reuse, programmers are like, we're supposed to reuse code, so we will architect small blocks of code to be that way.
Yeah.
And they stop there. So this is getting more into architecture, more into the bigger business picture, and in designing not just one system, but thinking down the road, will we have more? Right? Yeah. So you first need to determine if your product's going to be that way. Now, as we just said in the very beginning here, this doesn't always happen. Yeah. Very often what happens is people build a piece of software and then say, just like Intellij, right? Well, we could be making IDEs for other languages, right? Yeah. And that's a different, market demand there, market segment. And then what do we do? Well, what did they have to do? Either start building new instances, or take that instance that you have and do a retrofitting, like a giant refactoring plus actually changing the code to support two pieces of software that are kind of formed for one. It forms that family. Yeah. So then you have to go back and look at everything that would be, common and generic. And that's called a commonality, right? Sounds obvious, right? Commonality. And then where it gets really into the fun stuff, the commonality is easy because, all IDEs, you need, like VCS support. So you have GitHub and the other ones, Mercurial, et cetera. Yeah. You need to be able to open and save files. You need to be able to issue commands to call on a compiler. You need, certain things like that are pretty standard. So what JetBrains has done is built a platform, and it's the Intellij Platform. And we have a whole software development kit, which is that we open sourced this platform.
Yeah.
And there's docs out there and templates. So you could take them, download it, and just kind of whip up your own IDE based off of our Intellij Platform. And because that's what we do.
Love it. Yeah.
Right? So Android Studio did just this, Google, right? They just made their own IDE from IntelliJ. And there's a few others too. And one of them, the language is so esoteric, I keep forgetting what it is.
Okay.
It's some really strange language that like 6 people have heard of, and that's it.
Okay.
I never heard of it. And it was really a very, very specific domain, like auto parts or something like that, like really a real DSL, right? Real domain specific language. Yeah. But a lot of companies do have DSLs. So this would be a great way to make an IDE for it.
Interesting.
Specifically. So that's what we do. And then after that, we have a base of stuff that you could use to generate the basis of a new product in the family. Yeah. And then you add those features. Now, those features, such as being able to edit a Ruby code versus Java versus .NET, that's where the fun comes in. Yeah. And by fun, I mean, this gets complicated quickly.
Yeah, those are specifics.
So this would be called variability modeling. And there are some tools out there to help with it, but a lot of it ends up being done manually and depending on how you already model your software.
Okay.
One thing I'm seeing is a lot of companies are just not into modeling software anymore. Right? It's just kind of open your editor, file new project, go.
Speed all the way.
Right. So you would have to sit down and put some thought into, what are going to be these variabilities? Yeah. If I'm refactoring Ruby and I go to make a refactoring, is that going to work the same? Like maybe Go doesn't even have this construct that Ruby does. A lot of languages do share constructs, but how you would have to implement those, like just renaming, might be a little different, right, between them. Because you might suggest a certain naming notation in this language or that one. And we do that in our IDEs, right? Awesome. So that would be a little bit different depending on how people use the language. Yeah. So the variability is where it is. And so each time that you bring out a new product or a new version of your family or products in your family, you do have to go through and find what's going to be different across each of those products and then model it. And they actually have these specific ways of just using UML even to model it. And I know a lot of people are like, oh, you're so old. Yes, that is true. But nonetheless, people who are doing this kind of modeling are often, if you look at like Nokia or any of those phone lines, they're doing this, right? And they often have their own little tools to help internally perform some of the modeling. So you could do stuff like that. You could use, if you already do use something like UML or some kind of visual representation, there are some guides for doing it. And they use these little triangles to show like there's your, the head of this feature and then how it would branch off and differentiate into those different variances. So you can actually do a bit of your own modeling that way. Yeah. But even if you just jot it down, if it's a small product, you just jot it down in a notebook online somewhere and your team has access to it. Yeah. As long as everybody knows what's common and what's variable and what, and they can all get to that information. However you do it, you need to fit that in. Right? Exactly. That's the thing is this way of thinking about it is even more important than the actual fighting over, we don't use UML, that's too old and, stuff like that. Yeah. That happens. So you do have to give it that thought. Yeah. So, if you already have a product and you're starting to come up on this kind of landmark, that's what you have to start doing. Start thinking, well, do we build that second set of software or do we take this approach? Yeah. And so far, the best approach seems to be a platform plus plugins, and which is kind of what we do. So platform gives you the base, and then plugins could actually be individual features. Now, in the case of Intellij, it gets a little bit like sci-fi weird in that if I build a plugin, that could be a plugin or an entire IDE.
Yeah.
And then I have IDEs that have plugins. That could be entire IDEs that have plugins.
I can see how it gets complex. Yeah.
Good. So it's just that kind of weird concept naming, right? So I could make just a plugin that simply, there's fun ones like a little progress bar with a ducky or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay. So it just does one little feature, but you could have plugins that do a lot of stuff, or as in Android Studio, they do an entire IDE in this plugin. So you could go as little or as big as you want.
Yeah.
In our case. In everybody else's case, you don't have to make it this weird circular TARDIS thing, going on sci-fi.
Yeah.
But you could just have a platform and then let people, as if they're building Lego, right, build on top with little pieces.
Yeah.
So you get a basic Lego set, but this one has a little extra structure on top, and that one does not, and the other one has something different.
Yeah.
But you all have a common base that you're building off of, which is kind of the important way to structure it.
Yeah, I love the Lego analogy in that way.
Yeah,
because that really
Lego
just
building is
visualizes
who doesn't love Legos, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So I hope this is making sense so far.
Yeah, I mean, to me it does, right? There's a lot to think about, but I love where it started, right? As engineers, as developers, you know how to reuse stuff, right? You keep your mind dry. Sometimes you go overboard and you make things common, which don't need to be common. You have those discussions, right? I have them very often because I don't build common stuff unless I reuse it twice. And other people do it when they reuse it once. But there's different mindsets there, right? And then you go one step above that, right? Shared code or common packages or bundled code that you share within different applications. And you go even one level beyond that, right? Together, code makes a certain feature, a certain program. You could even call it a plugin. And then you reuse those, right? You build your software in your commonalities and your variables or your variabilities, as you mentioned. And then you kind of have those Lego blocks all of a sudden, right? A foundation within a platform. And then little things which you can plug and play and make your own kind of construct. I mean, that's why I love the Lego example. Because I got a toolbox, I made what was intended, and then I went my own way and I created some monstrosity. And as a kid, I really enjoyed that.
Yes,
and we're still doing that to a certain degree.
Yes. Yeah. It is very much like that. If you look at any of our products, it will be a collection of plugins that are mandatory. And then you could check off the ones that you want on top of that.
Exactly.
So, for example, IntelliJ, WebStorm, and Rider all have WebStorm in them. And that's for HTML and JavaScript and CSS, right? Basic web stuff. Now, Rider gets into some really interesting stuff in that it is .NET, right? So, and it's also part of the ReSharper. We have two families, actually, IntelliJ and ReSharper. Because of .NET. So ReSharper was a plugin to Visual Studio, which that's where that one gets a little bit weird just on its own, but it does have some certain features for .NET and whatnot. So Rider actually takes a lot of the UI from IntelliJ, and you see it looks and feels the same like the rest of our IDEs. That's another great benefit. Like your UX is not that much of a problem now, right? And it's very common, and then users have that nice familiarity no matter what they use. But we have the IntelliJ base, but then we take some of the intentions and refactorings and things like that from ReSharper. So we actually just kind of pull from two lines. So it's just, as if you took two different Lego sets and combined parts of them to make that other one, right? So it's a same Lego experience.
I love it because it's exactly what you mentioned. It's the ultimate kind of reusability, right? Mm-hmm. You don't keep reinventing the wheel. A lot of companies do. Actually, there was an episode that came out today that's talked about the not invented here syndrome, right? We need feature X, Y, and Z. Let's build that, or let's build it on the side usually. And then all of a sudden you're focusing on 10 different things that you want to rebuild because no one else wants it that way. And then you have no clue what to focus on and things don't get finished. And what are you actually doing? Like what's your core business? Kind of gets obscured in a way.
You lose sight of certain important things when you start going down that rabbit hole. And not invented here is a very, very terrible syndrome to get caught up in. I've seen it to the point to where I've seen somebody who basically in the early days of ASP.NET with web forms rewrote their own kind of web forms, not even realizing that's what they were doing. And then I'm like, but that's what ASP.NET does, but actually it does it better.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you don't have, it was just you versus a whole team and people who work on security and stuff versus you. Sorry. But
it's what I think of whenever a company wants to build their own kind of e-commerce platform. Again, right? It should be a solved problem, or you should already get those parts, right? Even those plugins, plug it in and make your own design. Sure, right? Make your own look and feel, your own UX. But a lot of the things, the shopping basket, the logic behind it, the security, a default audit trail, stuff like that is already within a numerous amounts of products. So please don't build another one.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of annoying when people do that just as a thing, right? Yeah. But when they try to do it for security, then there are serious repercussions, especially in e-commerce, where you're playing with people's money and credit, and lots of bad things can happen. Yeah.
So, if it goes wrong, it's a big issue.
Very big issue, and something I don't want to be responsible for. So you won't see me doing that, right?
Exactly.
Use security that's already rolled up.
Yeah. So and battle tested in a way. I'm thinking about the kind of product line, and I love how it can evolve, right? Yeah. But before the show, you also mentioned that you can kind of plan for it. I have no clue how you would do that, because evolution to me makes sense, right? You can see and you can figure out your commonalities and be like, oh, these are variabilities, right? And that's then how you progress. But before you even have anything, battle tested or in production, how can you already define that and even plan for that?
Yeah, that's where it's a little bit more difficult, and people are used to retrofitting, right? Rather than doing this, especially this kind of very different upfront planning.
Exactly.
Because you're not planning just a single product. Now you're planning multiples.
Yeah.
Well, the first step is knowing that you have a problem. To use some lingo from a different
I love it.
Thing. But yes, knowing that you are going to need a product line. So, as you're sitting down and you say, I have this product, I want to build this thing. Well, we do have to sit down and say, okay, what is, and I think all startups should do this, right? What is our actual market? Because I don't think a lot of startups do that. They just go, we have a thing, let's deploy.
We have a solution. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And you might deploy this thing and it might actually attract a lot of customers, which is wonderful. But maybe you could have had more if you thought about other markets also, right? Yeah. So you just have to stop and say, okay, so what exactly is the market for this thing I'm building?
Yeah.
And okay, so if I have market A, like e-commerce for, selling pets online or something, then, well, will we want to grow our business, or do we think we might want to grow our business to selling books also, or clothing, or something else? So for us, it would have been like, we're building this IDE. Might we do this for other languages and, other segments of computing as well? Yeah. And how would we go about doing that? And would it be maybe just an IDE or other dev tools? Mm-hmm. So that as well. So in the beginning, even with JetBrains, it just started again as just IntelliJ, went to RubyMine. And because of that, because it started as IntelliJ and went to RubyMine, there is still a lot of Java-specific stuff in IntelliJ that technically shouldn't have been there if it's a product line. Yeah. Right? And it wasn't until just the last few years that they actually refactored that and put all the Java stuff, almost all of it, like 99%, in its own plugin. So now it's truly just the editor guts, right? Just the editor skeleton. Yeah. And all the languages are specifically those extra Lego sets that you build on.
Really cool.
So, even us, like, it just took us a while to get around to actually, refactoring out that last little bit, which was the first little bit. But so this would just be sitting and thinking, do we want to do this? And if we're unsure, should we still continue? Because it's not terribly difficult to take this approach otherwise, right?
Yeah.
Because you are just thinking in larger terms of reuse. So, okay, we think we might go into these other market segments, and there might be a market demand for this, or we think as the market evolves, we might have these other demands. So what would be the most common things, right? And then start working on those, and then work on making those as part of a solid platform, and then modularize everything so that you have features, in their own packages that you could use as Legos or plugins or, widgets, whatever you want to call them. But like I said, we call them plugins.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's basically just kind of, instead of waiting, you're kind of just getting ahead of it and trying to architect it as if you already knew you were going to have a couple of products. And in some cases, you might actually know this.
Yeah.
If somebody were to open up a new, IDE shop, that's probably what they would do or should do, right? If they wanted to be successful across multiple languages.
Yeah. I still think it's very hard. I mean, even when we're implementing a function, right? I remember having discussions with someone within my team, and they're like, let's generalize this, right? We can use it in reasons X, Y, and Z, or in those scenarios. And I keep preaching, but we're not there yet. And I don't even know when or how we'll get there, but it does introduce that added complexity, right? You can kind of,
there is, because it is multiple products.
Yeah.
It is little, gears going in each of them. Yeah. And what you do in one is going to affect all of them, at least in a certain core of that code. Right? One just ripples across the others. So some of the techniques that they tend to use, aside from your standard issue, doing reuse, things like dependency injection. So there are certain things where if we're working on the core SDK, you drop something in and it's injected and then, automatically available. And then also for Java, because ours are Java based, right? You could do some aspect oriented programming, which I know is super out of fashion right now, but it's for cross-cutting concerns, right? Yeah. So that's another thing that you could do. So some of those techniques, and then of course doing some certain things like feature flags and stuff like that. To a degree, if you go overboard with like feature flags, then you end up just having a giant product with a whole bunch of features that get turned on and off, and that becomes difficult to maintain as well, rather than modularizing or some of these other things. But it does. It is much more planning. So it's one of those things, either it's going to evolve or you might know it from the start, or you could stop, think about it, and if you heavily suspect you're going to go down this route, then you can at least start looking at this architecture to see how it will better serve you. Yeah. So,
I'm wondering, so let's say you already have an established product, right? It could be, I like the IDE example, but it could even be kind of an e-commerce website in a way. When will you either, let's say you want to venture into a new market or a new part of business, and you have this working application, right? You can use your commonalities or you can rebuild something completely from scratch. But how do those decisions get made? Like, what can you reuse, and when does it make sense to reuse versus kind of building a new thing specifically for a business need?
Yeah, I don't think there's one place where you could say it just happens, but I think as developers sit there and they say, okay, so we have this new thing we have to attend to, right? This new segment of customers. How do we fit this in? And they sit down to start either planning for the next version, which is most likely where that would show up. Yeah. You start planning for this next version, and then somebody says, well, but if I do this, it kind of cancels out this other feature that we already had, or it would be at odds with it. And that's probably going to be the start right there, is where you're going to start saying, well, this feature is at odds with this feature because of these differences in these market segments. Yeah. This whole bunch of code seems good, but up here at this part, putting a piece of clothing versus a book, choosing the size and all that, that's where that's going to different. So you're going to notice it at some point. There's going to be an at odds that you come across. And then that's where people either are just going to try to code around it, and then you start to have all the feature flags, or people are going to say, oh, crap, well, we can't. That's too much to code around.
Yeah.
And then they'll say, and it's usually not just one feature. If it's a team, you're going to have a bunch of these little features. And this is all going to happen at that same time from like version 1 to 2, or, that next version leap.
Exactly.
So then, okay, well, what do we do? Well, so that's where a lot of people go clone and own, which is just copy it over, fork it all over, and then just start again. But then how fast is it going to be before these people go, oh, crap, I'm fixing a bug here. I have to remember to fix it in another whole nother code base, not just the whole 2 functions in a code base, which is a little easier.
Yeah.
Like even our tools don't search in projects you don't even have open or related. It's like even our tools can't search there. So stuff like that. So you'll have this point where you start to feel a real friction. And for us, that would have been going to RubyMine, right? They pretty quickly said, yeah, that's not going to work. We have to restructure this for a platform plus, the extras. So that's where that generally you should start feeling this pain. And I think multiple people are going to feel it. And then you have to make that decision. Do we just go for that clone and then maybe more, or do we just make a product line out of it? So,
yeah, I think it's such a long-term kind of thought process.
It is. And people just don't like that. This is modern times,
Yeah. I mean, let's say you make a decision, you're going to say clone and own, right? And all of a sudden it works, but you now have 2. And then so there's a new business need. And then all of a sudden they expect you to do that again with the same speed. And because cloning and owning, we did it before. Yeah, I'm going to say it will work that first time you do it. Yeah. And it'll be fine and dandy. And okay, a bug in A and then go fix it in B is not the worst thing. And you may have separate teams. Yeah. So they might even be a little isolated. Yeah. Right? Or people who work on, depending on how you structure your team, if they work on features on both or something, but there might be some isolation there. But that'll work probably fine. But it's like you said, you'll hit that other pain point when you find another segment, or even certain features that become at odds within the realm of these 2. And then it just starts getting like a big quagmire quickly. Yeah, it snowballs.
Wherein if you did the product line out to the second one and the third, research has shown that around 3, you start to level out and you actually start to make money on it. And make money is maybe not the best term, but you're not putting in, it's the cost is easier for what you get. You're getting a return now at this point. The value is
greater.
Yeah, a little tired today, and the words weren't coming there. But have that return on investment at this point. And it was Rolls-Royce, actually. Fancy pants. So I don't know anybody who owns one of these cars. Just not fancy enough. But they did one. And I think if you search out there for like Rolls-Royce and product lines, you might see this little chart that they have. And they said at 3, it comes out pretty good. You're getting a return on your investment. Yeah. And the same, like generally for phones and stuff, they find that. And cars do the same thing. As a matter of fact, completely physically, the auto platform, like you hear about the Toyota platform, the Honda platform, cars do the same thing with product lines, except they start that way when they bring out a new model. They have a platform and then they do it the same way, but it's all for a physical car. Yeah. But they also do it with their software too.
Oh, really?
Because it kind of tracks with the cars, right? Yeah. And now that there's software in the cars, they do it for that software in the cars as well. So
that's dope.
It's product lines everywhere in the auto realm.
Yeah, so. I didn't know that.
That's actually where software got some of the ideas from, right? Was the cars and the phones. The embedded market is really big into this. Yeah. And I see more so over here in Europe. In academia, this is kind of big. That's where I was introduced to it when I was doing my master's. And over in the US, not so much.
Okay.
I mean, they're using it and embedded in these same industries, but general population programming, not so much.
No, so. That probably explains why when you've seen kind of a software within a car, it'll look like the same software in a different car, I guess, or a version of the same brand.
Yep.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I didn't know that. There's a lot of things. I mean, when you and I discussed this topic, I was kind of mind blown, right? Because you mentioned Adobe and their product suite. And I was like, yeah, everything does kind of look the same. And I open a different editor, or I open Photoshop and Premiere Pro and kind of have the same look and feel, the same components.
So they have the double thing going on. They have some lineage, but they also have a suite.
Yeah.
And just so that we have a couple terms right, a product suite is usually just bundled together for sales and licensing.
Yeah.
Within that could be a line.
Okay.
Like ours, we have an all products back, which is all of our stuff, right?
Yeah.
But also, you could have a suite of things such as Microsoft Dynamics is great. It's all different. You have sales and CRM, you have like a retail thing and accounting. They're all different pieces of software.
Okay.
Bundled together very often, right? So that would be a suite. But within a suite, it could be a product line.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
There could be lines inside there. So Adobe's kind of doing that. They do have some lines, but they also have a suite where some of those are not necessarily related, but do reuse some of the same components.
Yeah.
Because none of this can be simple.
Exactly. You can have multiple lines in the same suite. Okay. Yeah.
You can. Yes, you can. Yeah. So, yeah. And you can sell these any way you want, right? Individual products, a few of them, all of them, whatever you want.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes complete sense.
But suites are generally about sales. Within the suite, you might find the product though, or product line.
Yeah, thanks for clearing that up. I didn't have that as sharp in the back of my mind, but it does make sense the way you lay it out.
A lot of folks go right for Microsoft Dynamics, folks in .NET, but no, that's a suite. That's not a line. That's definitely not a line. Yeah.
Exactly. I think we went over a lot with regards to product lines already. I love kind of the journey you laid out. Is there anything that's missing kind of in this journey or that we haven't touched upon yet?
No, just that there is not, for modeling tools, I would like to see better modeling tools.
Yeah.
Though I am too lazy to go out and help create any of these myself. So I will gladly sit on that blame.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, that would be nice. And I think that might actually help, popularizing this kind of longer term and bigger reusability thought plus tools might help people be able to make dents into markets that they maybe didn't even think they could, right? Because I'm pretty sure this is holding some people back. They have a product and there's this juicy market segment here, but how do we get there? We need to redo the software and it's too much for our small team, our small startup, and some cheap tools and, more acknowledgement of this process would, I think, help go a long way. Yeah,
I think it's all about kind of creating that shared mental model in a way, right? What does it look like now? What would make sense if we venture into that kind of new market or fit that business need?
And thinking down the road for different versions and what might come up in the market. Doing the business.
Yeah. What would you say is looking too far ahead in the future, right? Because I can see looking far ahead in the future.
Right.
But at some point you can probably be like, well, that is way too far.
Sure. Yeah. I think if there's something that isn't even tangible whatsoever, like, 6 versions down. No, like let's stay like 1 version ahead or maybe the next market segment. And you don't need to go much further than that. Yeah. Because as you start working on the next market segment, the business development people should be popping up in your ears and saying, well, we're thinking about this and we're thinking about that and getting your feedback on that. So
exactly.
Talk to the business people. And that also
like
helps,
usual. Yeah. So you really just look at kind of the neighboring markets, I guess. And when you venture into those, you have kind of new neighboring markets surrounding it. And then you can see if it makes sense. In that way it does, because if you venture into a completely new market, then it doesn't really have anything to do with your core business, right? Then should you reuse then what you have? Probably not.
Right. Yeah. You have to know, or, and usually business development people are going to have a better idea if this is going to be a direction your company's going in or not.
Yeah.
Right. So you talk to them and say, well, do you think this might be a direction, or do you have any suggestions for future directions that we might go into? What are the company's long-term goals?
Yeah.
Because imagine we're writing software for the company, right? So ask the business development people and the execs, like, what are our goals, right? What are we looking at these markets in the future, or is there certain ones we just don't care about?
Yeah.
Right? Don't even look there, and then help them guide your architecture, because that's who it's for, right? Those people in that market segment.
Exactly.
So that's what you want to do.
Yeah. As kind of a final topic or question, you mentioned at some point the commonalities that you made within the IDE. You decided to open source that, right? So a lot of people can make their own plugins, their own IDEs, their own variants. Why open source? First and foremost, I think it's awesome. But I do think there's a lot of questions that go before that actual decision of making it open like that.
Right. Well, it was open source before I joined.
Okay.
So I didn't actually see the actual conversations, but I do know our attitudes on open source.
Yeah.
And the attitude of most people in general at JetBrains is, yes, we love open source.
Yeah.
We like the principles behind it. We like transparency. And this does give a lot of people who have been asking, like, what about this feature? And we know darn well, like, hey, look, COBOL is not going to be a language we're supporting. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
We just don't have, the resources to fund that market, or quite frankly, the interest outside of academia, I suppose.
Yeah, I get that.
But if you want to create your own plugins or IDE, here you go. And you can still be a customer of ours and do, use the IDEs for other things or whatever, or even resell them on our marketplace, right? And stuff like that, right? So, and I think we get a small stipend when stuff like that happens.
Yeah.
So great. So it still works out, and we still have happy people out there that can still get what they want. So yeah, those are some of the open source things. We have a lot of people just very into open source. They write their own software, sometimes on or off the clock or all hours, all blends in anymore. So,
exactly.
Yeah. So we have a lot of open sourcers out there. It's really where we're at.
Yeah, I think it's super cool, right? Because if you wouldn't have open sourced kind of those building blocks, the no would have been pretty painful, right? I mean, no is already kind of harsh, but then you wouldn't have any options. Now you can say, well, we're not going to do it. That's a no. But you have the options to either do it yourself, find people with common ground that want to do the same thing, and make it happen, right? You have the building blocks. You just need to put them together and make your own Lego construction, I guess. Yeah.
And so this is great for us. I mean, not everybody has to go open source or anything like that. And to be a product line, it does not have to be open source, but it works great for us. I'm sure there's markets where this is probably not the best, but we make software for software people. So
exactly.
I mean, that would be kind of weird, actually, if we didn't open source this, wouldn't it? At some point.
I get that. Cool. I want to thank you so much for coming on, Rachel.
Thanks for having me.
A topic I was really excited about, and I'm really happy. I think we kind of gave a broad overview of what it entails, right? And how it can evolve or how it can be planned even, which is enormously hard to do, I guess.
Yeah, because you have to take your own planning and then add in processes for being able to work it across an entire family. But yeah, I could be here for the next 6 hours going into those details, but I think we got covered what you need to know to start that journey.
Yeah, I think that's really awesome. Thank you again for coming on. And Rachel Appel, everyone.
Thank you.
Beyond Coding. From your sponsors, Zebia, creating digital leaders.